on that. Yeah, it's really interesting materials. So we have got some time left. We're quite flexible, but we can have some questions now. So I would ask if the presenters would like to appear on the screen. We can make it look a bit more interactive, I guess, and then have a discussion, or we can open it up. I've got the chat thing going here, but there's been a lot of chat, so do please bring your questions in. This is your big chance to ask some questions. So who would like to ask the first question? Abe, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Gary. I have a question for the gentleman, Dr. Muhammad, about the hadith study that you did about nikah. Just, part of the dilemma is that this is enabled by digital media, but there's the other part that there's an emergency. Where does maslaha, the process of maslaha, in terms of public good, that can make something undesirable desirable because of a new condition that has come in, like a COVID? So, I mean, is there any discussion that the rulings about nikah via digital media can be overruled by public utility, because we are in a situation where travel is prohibited, and so just what kind of agency do people have when it comes to applying maslaha as a Sharia process?
Thank you very much, Dr. Ibrahim. I haven't seen any discussions of maslaha as far as nikah on Zoom, etc. are concerned. If you look at the old fatwas, these are very old, since the 1990s, they've been discussing all of this from the point of view of telephone marriages. That's when that was the new media, and they discussed this. So these are new kind of old issues in new forums. So they do discuss maslaha there. But first of all, maslaha is one of those very arbitrary terms. Anybody can define what maslaha is. Maslaha is so broad that it becomes meaningless. That's point number one. Point number two, in the UK, what we have is a particular situation where 69% of the British Muslim population are from South Asia, and they have a very strong Hanafi streak to them. They follow the Hanafi school of thought. And the Hanafi school of thought has not really, or the Indian scholars from the subcontinent they haven't really bought into this idea of maqasid al-sharia and maslaha. They don't do that. Okay, they basically see that as a very Arab thing, and that is very wishy-washy. It's very wishy-washy, and there's this democratization of knowledge, and it's it's open for grabs for everyone. They're still very conservative with their fiqh manuals, and the religious law has to be derived from the views of Abu Hanifa. So maslaha and all of these, they don't even go there. They basically say, well, there is no dawabit. There are no so basically what we have parallel types of ijtihad. We've got ijtihad maqasidi, and then we have ijtihad madhabi, and then we have ijtihad usuli. At the moment, a lot of it, at least certainly in the UK, is ijtihad madhabi, and therefore we're not seeing those kind of maslaha discussion.
Okay, thank you very much.
Quite interesting in terms of the ways in which similar types of questions have appeared online for several years in some of the Q&A channels as well, and so there are lots of people battling with these concerns. Okay, Rob's got a question now.
Well, since I'm a panelist, maybe we should defer to Hayat, and then I can jump in if there are none from outside. Is that okay?
Okay, yeah, that's fine. Hayat, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for this outstanding panel. It was really very interesting to see different, perspectives and different topics about, digital religion. But maybe my question, since as I have mentioned earlier, I'm working on the impact of digitization on religious authority. I'm mainly looking at mosques. That's why my question may be to Sana. I would like to know. I'm interested in this dichotomy between online and offline world. So I would like to know if you came across this while looking at online mosques and how people see them as like an alternative for offline mosques or not. And I think it's also something that Rob has mentioned earlier, that the Sufi or for them this experience, the religious experience cannot be can be not lived through digital media. But I would like to see also if mosques are the same or not. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I think that's a very good question, and it really does depend on an individual basis. And the reason I am saying that is because looking at the shifting of religious authority from offline to online spaces, lived religion is really important. So for some people who may find offline spaces to be uncomfortable, they may not be able to meet with the imam in person, maybe because of judgment or whatever the issue may be. Online spaces offer like anonymity, right? So that's why a lot of people prefer online spaces. And then you have social media. You see imams on social media. So you can access someone as popular as Mufti Menk online that you may not even be able to see in person never. But even at like religious events where these scholars do come, you may be able to interact with them. But I think what I would like to do in terms of my papers to actually go speak to Canadian Muslims and see how they feel. Is participating in an online mosque or participating in online religious rituals a part of their lived Islam? So I think like it really is an issue of like what the individual thinks, how people do religion, how people perform Islam. And because of COVID, it is interesting to see like everyone has been forced to be online whether they like it or not. So I don't actually know if there are any like full online mosques. Like I know there are Facebook groups of mosques. I know there are groups that only meet on Facebook, but I believe there is virtualmosque.com. But I don't know if they do like rituals on there, prayers on there, but it's pretty interesting. So maybe you can take a look at that.
Sorry, I'm a bit slow on my button pushing this afternoon. Yeah, really interesting. We have got another question from the chat, and this is a question for everyone here. And this is from Harun, and the question is, have you come across some clear instances of ikhtilaf where authority figures of similar status go in very different directions regarding what is valid in terms of online practices and or responses to COVID? That's a great question. Over to the panel.
Can I just respond first? I mean, the COVID-19 has been a goldmine for researchers. I mean, I've just been from March 24, when there was a lockdown here, I've just been downloading information and I've just putting them in my computer. I mean, there's nearly in everything there is ikhtilaf. I mean, I've written a paper with a colleague. It's published in the journal Religions. It's called British Muslim Amidst Fogs. And FOGS stands for Fatwas, Guidance, and Other Materials. And in there, we kind of we look at 1 month of data from March 2020 to the beginning of Ramadan, April 2020, and just the amount of sheer data that was generated during that time. And we discuss it there. So, I mean, yeah, I mean, there's been nearly on everything there is ikhtilaf. I'll just stop there.
Well, it would be great to have an example.
COVID nikah, Friday prayers, Taraweeh, virtual Taraweeh. I mean, one of the things that I was going to mention is virtual Taraweeh, whether virtual Taraweeh is permissible or not. So the Malikis, and a lot of people were taking the views of the Malikis in the sense that according to Maliki fiqh, you don't really need to have a physical congregation as long as the voice reaches. And therefore the argument is that through Zoom and satellite, is that actual real voice or is that digital signals? So there's these sophisticated debates that what are we listening to? Are we listening to the real voice? Are we listening to digital? So all sorts of
I might just jump in that question very quickly, and just to affirm that within individual Sufi organizations and Turuk and across divergent ones, there's a great deal of ikhtilaf. There's not a consensus at all about the permissibility and the utility of digital media. Not surprisingly, it tends to be the deciding vote seems to come from the Mushayikh or Shaykhas. But just to give an example, I mean, the question of bayat, online initiation, the Naqshbandi Haqqanis under Sheikh Kabani have been doing this for years, but the group I described and many other Chisti organizations have been very vehemently opposed to it, but in the time of COVID, there's been a concession. To take another example, there are two branches of the Helveti Jirahi order in the United States. One, the Jirahi order in upstate New York, previously under the leadership of the late Sheikh Tosun, more traditional, traditionally Turkish, and they have a website and they've used digital media, but it's quite circumscribed. Whereas if you compare that with the Nur Ashki Jirahis, so the same tradition, the same lineage, the same teachers, under Sheikh Fariha in New York City, they've gone in a radically different direction, not only online and offline. So that's an example of one particular tariqa with deep connections that in the last 10 years has moved in radically different ways in regards to ritual practice, community boundaries, but also digital media. So yes, that was a long way of saying yes.
And I think it's been interesting too, the way in which some of the opinions have shifted over the weeks as well. I mean, I didn't mention it in today's presentation, but in the Egyptian context, for example, the rapidly changing opinions as we went from week to week, as people started to adapt, it was also really interesting, if not difficult to follow, but yeah, complex. So here we go. Have we got more questions? So we're getting lots of references coming in. This panel has got footnotes, so we have lots of references bouncing through the chat. But Rob, I think you had a question actually a few minutes ago, didn't you?
I did, although it's a bit meta and may take us in other directions. So if somebody has a more specific one for a panelist, I'd be happy to defer. But
I have a question for Rob.
Please.
Okay, so thank you. Is there a perception of qualitative difference between those who took the bay'ah physically offline and those who took digital bay'ah?
The answer would be depends who you ask and which particular tariqa you're talking about. The Naqshbandi Haqqanis, for example, have been doing it for years. They insist that it's totally valid if and only if it's then followed up by a visit to the sheikh in person and an engagement with the community. This is such a new thing with the Inayatiyya, and I think a temporary response, but in this moment they've responded in similar fashion. My sense is that the Inayatiyya, following Chisti precedent, will go back to the insistence on a face-to-face formal initiation. But again, as Gary just suggested, these questions are answers to these questions are evolving and day to day, week to week. But there's always a fatwa for something.
Thank you.
Temporary that won't be.
Okay, we've got a question, or somebody would like to ask a question. Cherry has raised a hand, so we have your question, please.
Yes, hi everybody.
Hi.
Just interesting listening about the online mosques, and then the idea about the cyber marriages. And so I just want to relate something, a lived experience of my own, in the sense that beginning of COVID last year, a group of a woman, well, we're part of a Muslim personal law network, and we, out of our WhatsApp group, we decided to start an online Jummah. Most of us would attend Jummah in an offline space, and then having lost that, decided to create our own space for an online Jummah. And this was women. Okay, we were creating our own space. And I can remember when I first, the first couple, I thought, and this kind of goes back to what Mohammed said about, you know, hearing the voices, and the voice must be direct, etc. And I can remember sitting listening and thinking, oh, well, this doesn't seem any different to when I'm sitting in the masjid and I can't see the imam and I'm hearing it over the loudspeaker and etc. That I'm receiving this voice over the computer. And then as we got into it, and we've been doing this now for a year, and as we got more into it, I thought I actually like this far more, because I can actually see everybody. I can see the woman, I can see the khatiba, I can see the person who's leading the salah, and it's become for me a space that's far more comforting and far more connective than actually sitting in a masjid where I can't see the imam who is leading the prayers. So I just thought I would add that in, just in terms of a lot of what's being said tonight does not relate to gender. So and when I say gender, it's all very male oriented talk, as compared to how women experience a lot of what's being discussed. So I just wanted to say that.
I'm not sure if anybody wanted to respond to that important point. Anybody like to say anything? Very interesting point there. Can I use Chair's prerogative and ask a question, maybe? I just wanted to ask Andrea about the data privacy issue that you mentioned regarding the apps, because over the last several months there have been issues about prayer apps harvesting data and sending it in nefarious directions, leading to things like, we've got the Pillars app that's launched in UK over the last several months. So I'm just wondering whether you can tell me a little bit more, if you've found out any more about the data privacy issue in relation to Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. So I think I actually still included an image of a screenshot of Muslim Pro, because it still shows up. That's the big prayer app that came out of the United States as being the one that harvests people's data, for the obvious reason that you can't really find out the right prayer time for you unless you also indicate your location. So it's both really challenging and also foundational. In terms of the apps, the Saudi government apps, I have not looked for it. So this has not been my specific focus. So I feel like you only get the answers to the questions that you're asking. If you're not asking those questions, you're not going to get those answers. But I haven't been looking for people who are specifically concerned about privacy. But it is, so I live in the United States. I live in Colorado, where we have recently had, news reporting things of how the contact tracing has failed, how all of these kind of privacy things don't work because people are so resistant, right? Like in the United States, starting with not wearing masks and not believing in COVID. And it is surprising to me, by contrast, the extent to which, like looking at the Saudi government apps, even pre-COVID, the high rate of adoption, particularly starting with Absha, right? Like if you don't use it, then you have such minimal access to all these other kinds of governmental services. And so there seems to be very strong opt-in pressure prior to COVID, and there seems to be some strong normativization of just the use of these apps, and like, of course, your information is there, to the extent that the only thing I've seen related to what I think might be privacy concerns are that Tawakkalna also can work outside of Saudi Arabia. And that has been seen by at least some people as a positive thing. So again, it hasn't been a focus for me, but I think it's been quite different than, at least anecdotally, the experience of some to many Americans in terms of strong concerns about data privacy in terms of government apps, versus what seems to be fairly minimal publicly expressed concerns, which may not be the same as minimal concerns for this particular array of apps. But I'd love to hear. I think this whole day has been amazing, and this group has, I think, a really rich array of information and expertise. So if other people have been looking at this in other directions, I'd love to hear other folks' thoughts or experience to share.
Well, I just want, this is a real experience. It's not a studied experience. I work in Northwestern's campus in Doha, in Qatar, and I have no choice. I have to have their government ihtiraz app, and I cannot go into a store unless, I don't know if you all can see this, Exhibit A, and it tells the store owner that I don't have COVID, and also tells the store owner or the store manager that I'm vaccinated. So I can't do anything without this, and I can't leave the country without it, and I can't get in the country without it. So, and in terms of being surveillance and so forth, I think everybody just assumes that's what's going to happen, but we have no choice. I mean, this is where you work. This is where you work, and yeah. So that's. I mean, there's no option here.
Yeah, I think that's a common concern for many people in terms of surveillance and being monitored, even with VPNs on and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
And that's the researcher's dilemma too. But I think that's a subject for another event and another conference. So if we don't have any, I don't know if we have any further questions at this stage. Rob, is that a legacy or is that your?
No, that's one. But if people are done, I can.
No, go for it. Go for it. If you got a question.
Maybe this is an unanswerable question, but I would just say that listening to all of you has got me thinking again about the very predictable question that what happens post-COVID for states, for fuqaha, for ulama, for pilgrims, for local mosques, for Sufis, for Sana's dad. I mean, there's two ways to go here, right? Like the idea that digital media usage in COVID was a necessary but a regrettable concession to a unique set of circumstances. Thank God COVID's gone. Now jettison it, like collective Zoom fatigue. Or, oh my gosh, the pandemic has opened this new space. It's clearly demonstrated the utility and viability and permissibility of these spaces. Digital media, let's turbocharge it, release the digital hounds. I mean, my instincts previously were to say, I think we're going to see a resurgence. And maybe it's because it's been a long day and I'm tired of Zoom, but I'm starting to think not. So I'm just curious, again, maybe this is just a meta question to ponder for all of us, but we all have to think about it. What's going to happen? Because I think there's an argument to be made that people will embrace it, and there's a new argument to say people will understand the absolute necessity of the real, the offline, the face-to-face, the flesh and blood, and forget about digital everything. That's a question. A big question. And Sana's going to answer it by telling us what her dad's going to do, and then that'll be the evidence.
So it looks like a new book for Gary.
Oh, exactly. I was going to say for you, actually, I think you should be on it. I'm already working on one, so yeah, go for it. Go for it. I think several books, to be honest, and it just shows that this area is opening up so much more in terms of research and interpretation and the fantastic survey data that's being generated that can feed into all of this as well. We're seeing an increase in terms of the number of people who are studying this subject, compared with what I can recall 25 years ago. And now we're seeing a great growth and more granularity and more emphasis on diversity, whether it's gender or religious expression, you know, or other forms of interpretation. I think the field is really opening up, and I'm hoping that the panels that we've had today and the presentations that we've had today will kind of contribute to that conversation. I know that there's a lot more work that's going to be coming out in this area. Rob's got his book coming out. Saria was asking for articles in relation to COVID-19 in panel 1 and would be interested in anything. So I'll give her a plug. And if you need the email, I can pass it through to you later on for a journal that she's putting together. But lots of other people working in this area too. And it's also filtering in terms of it's being part of research. And now we're seeing a great growth and more granularity and more emphasis on diversity, whether it's gender or religious expression, you know, or other forms of interpretation. I think the field is really opening up, and I'm hoping that the panels that we've had today and the presentations that we've had today will kind of contribute to that conversation. I know that there's a lot more work that's going to be coming out in this area. Rob's got his book coming out. Saria was asking for articles in relation to COVID-19 in panel 1 and would be interested in anything. So I'll give her a plug. And if you need the email, I can pass it through to you later on for a journal that she's putting together. But lots of other people working in this area too. And it's also filtering in terms of it's being part of research rather than being compartmentalized. I think looking at Islam, Muslims and the net is now integrated more into mainstream studies, multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary studies. So thank you very much for all of your contributions. It's been great. All of the recordings will be edited eventually, if not immediately, and placed online. If you don't want them online, let me know and I can hold back on the publication. It won't be immediately, I can promise you that. And keep in touch. And thank you very much indeed for participating. Great to see you all. And it's bizarre seeing you at home in a room in my house rather than in the conference hall. And it's a somewhat surreal experience, but I hope you've enjoyed the day anyway, and look forward to seeing you again soon.
Okay, thank you, Gary. It was really
Thanks for making this possible.
Thanks so much, Gary. Take care, everyone.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Good to see you. Bye for now.